everybody. Happy Sunday. We're here to give our Sunday Devotional, which we've done now 3 times. I can't even believe it. And I hope that you find these something to be inspired by, since we don't have church. And I am film critic Rachel Wagner. I have had quite a week. It's pretty crazy. But I'm joined today again by my friend Chris from Durbania. Thank you so much, Chris,
Hello.
for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me back. It was so fun to do last time and just encouraging to talk about this stuff. So I'm excited to be back.
Yeah. It was really, it's been really great. And I hope that I've gotten some positive feedback. I think people are enjoying it. And we'd love to hear more feedback from you guys, what topics you'd like us to talk about. Try to make this as non-denominational as possible. And so today we're going to talk about hope. And so what I do is I read kind of my talk, my sermon for the week, and then we'll have a discussion about it and talk about our experiences. And so, let us know your thoughts in the comments or on Twitter. We'd love to hear your feedback. When I decided to talk about hope for this week's devotional, a side of me worried things could dive quickly into what I call the ooey gooey territory. This is when serious concerns are glossed over by an admonition to think positively, be nice, and good things will happen. While usually well-intentioned, this type of trite religion has never worked for me. And I think it denies each of us the true richness that the hope in Christ's teaching actually provides. In the dictionary, hope is defined as a, quote, a feeling of expectation and desire for certain things to happen, or a feeling of trust. In Psalms 31:24, the Lord tells us to be of good courage, and he shall strengthen your heart, all ye that hope in the Lord. But what is this thing we want to have happen? What's this expectation? And why does that make us strong? Obviously, this answer will vary some from person to person, but in general, most of us want respite from the storm, a peaceful ending in the distance, an assurance that we have done enough to secure a space with the faithful forever. Luther King Jr. says, we must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope. Even Jesus himself had discouraging moments. At one point in his ministry, he looks out over the land and laments, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often have I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing." While sad at the choices of the people, he didn't give up on his mission or lose hope in the Lord's master plan. He had hope through God that all things are possible and that everything would be made right in the end. So how can we cultivate this hope without being a simpleton? The first step is to put your trust in the Lord. We must take a step into the unknown to fully understand the strength of his love for us. And then take notice of the strength given to you in those hard times as we get through it. The hymn Amazing Grace reminds us that through many dangers, toils, and snares, we have already come. 'Twas grace that brought us safe thus far, and grace will lead us home. The more we rely on the Lord, the more we will see his hand in our lives. This makes the tough times bearable and the good times sweeter. There was a time in my life where I had lost hope in the Lord. I didn't see the light at the end of the tunnel or that good things could happen. And it's a time I will never forget. When I was 27, I was working in a job I hated for 3 years. I knew the whole time that I needed to get out of this environment, that it wasn't where I was supposed to be, but I clung on to sort of common sense that this was what I had to do. I couldn't quit my job. That's craziness. But I had a manager who treated me with continual disdain and condescension, and she treated me like I was just this child that she had to put up with, no matter how hard I worked or how exemplary my work was. It didn't matter. There was always a problem. There was always a flaw. And I felt like she hated me no matter what I did. It was a really, really hard situation. And at the time I was going to grad school. And so I was like, I can't quit my job. I'm going to grad school. And that was also very stressful. And so I was working either at school or at work, like 70 hours a week at this thing that I hated. And that's going to wear at anyone's soul after a while. And I felt like my whole life was consumed by joyless business and daily tasks that had long since numbed my soul and taken my spirit. I remember my mom asking me one day, like, why is this so hard? Why is this, when all the other things that you've dealt with in your life, why is this the thing that's stalling you, that's got you? And I just remember thinking about it and just saying, I feel like I have a black cloud over my life and it will not go away. And I felt like I was incapable of feeling joy. And just nothing would make me happy. Everything, it was just this spiral that was so hard to deal with. And there's a lot of different stories. And maybe as these devotionals continue, I will share about that time in my life, because it wasn't just one day and there was a solution. There was a lot of different experiences. But I do know that I will never forget that feeling of just that there was no light at the end of the tunnel. There was nothing that was going to make this black cloud go away. And when I quit that job finally, I knew that I promised myself I would never let that happen again. And I would never allow myself to feel that way again. I would never allow myself to lose hope again. And I've had trials, I've had frustrations, I've had sad times, but I have never been hopeless again, and I will never allow that again. And that's just something I will never forget. And I think even now, as tension is thick and anxiety is high, we cannot lose hope in good things to come. Just this week, I worried I might have a coronavirus, and I was pretty obviously upset because I've had this cold. I've had some breathing problems for the last 2.5 months, and I was put on an inhaler. I went to the doctor, but I never had a fever. But then people were talking about the fact that they got diagnosed with no symptoms at all, and so that concerned me. And so I called. I did all the necessary things. And then I got tested, and fortunately I was tested negative. So that's a great relief. Yes. But even if I had been positive, it is through his hope and his strength that I would have been able to get through it. And also through the support of my family and friends. But we must trust that no matter what, the Lord redeemeth the soul of his servants, and none of them that trust in him shall be desolate. If we can find a way to trust God, he will grant us the hope to get through this and any other challenging time. He will show us what we have to look forward to. We will be buoyed up by his strength. After all, he has walked where we have walked, and his atonement covers every tear we shed. And every anxious night of sleep lost, he knows. He loves us, and his hope helps us get through anything that is thrown our way. So you've had a week to kind of think about, or a couple days to think about hope, Chris. Yeah. What are some of the thoughts that you had about this? It's kind of a little bit of a tricky topic, I feel like, to kind of wrap your brain around sometimes.
Because it's a little bit nebulous. And sometimes what it takes is an example to see it. And one of the verses in the Bible that has always challenged me, that with everything you just said, I think it fits perfectly. It's James chapter 1, verse 3, where he says, consider it all joy when you go through various trials. Now, I kind of did a paraphrase of that verse, but if you look up James 1:3, it's basically that. When you go through these trials, consider it joy. And he says, why? Because it'll perfect your faith and lead you into maturity. And I used to hate that verse. I used to hate it because who wants to go through trials of various kinds? But the truth is, we live in a fallen world. And in a fallen world, that's just its nature. The nature of this world is we will go through hardships and we will go through trials. And it's that hope, which is why he can look at that and consider it joy. See, the considerate joy is a perspective. And so that's what hope is. And I liked what you read, the definition of hope, because the Bible's definition of hope is a confident expectation. Like we are confidently expecting the coming of Jesus. When we hope for him, it's not a nebulous thing. He will come again. We confidently expect that. When we go through trials of any kind, that's what enables us to consider it joy, because we can confidently expect him to never leave us or forsake us and to always come through for us. And that might look different, like different than what we pictured and different than what we imagined. And sometimes we can let that be a disappointment, but we have to go back to that perspective. We have to consider it joy, because he won't leave us. He is with us, and he will always come through for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when you just think about that, it doesn't even matter like whether it's what the trial. It doesn't matter what the trial is, whether it's with me in this job situation, whether it's whether being sick or health, or it doesn't matter because what matters is the loss of hope that I felt at that time, where I just felt like there was no light. There was nothing, and I feel like now I could go through anything, and it would never be that it would be significantly harder than what I went through then. But because I was just in this place where it really felt like I was incapable of feeling joy, that I'd have good things happen, and I would just feel empty, and I think it was mostly my fault, because I had just allowed myself to stay in a situation I knew was toxic, and I knew I needed to leave, but I lacked the courage to make that choice. And so I don't know. I think that it's just so crucial to being able to get through anything that happens is finding that light that hope provides, of there will be a respite, there will be that Jesus does understand what you're going through, and it can help us get through anything.
I will say, like, I recently went through a very tough mental time, and in some ways I'm still recovering from it.
Yeah.
But about 4 years ago, I got laid off, not just from any job, but from a job that I dearly loved. From a job that I would say was my first real career job, and I took more ownership of it than anything. And it was this Christian station that I had started at where I live now, and I worked there for about 6 years. And about halfway through that, our general manager left. So we went through a time of transition, and that's where things got mentally tough for me, because as things were transitioning, the dust was never able to settle. And because it was a Christian radio station, it was listener supported, and we were losing support like crazy. It was a constant downhill thing. And the thing that really made it mentally tough on me more than anything else is there was a particular boss there. And I say this in love, because he and I get along really well now and everything like that, but he was going through a tough time as well. And it was hard for me to see that then. But as we were transitioning and doing whatever we could to get supporters back, I was having a hard time with the choices they were making, and I wasn't always expressing it the most politely. And so he basically took me aside and said, "Hey, you're a sedan, and sedans are good, and people need sedans, but what I need is a pickup truck." And so when you have somebody that you look up to that much, that kind of looks at you and says that, it hurts, because it attacks almost the core of who you are. And he meant no harm with it. I don't think that he understood how I heard that and how I took that, because I know him and I know his heart. He meant no harm by that, but that hit me hard. And that was 5 years ago, and I still remember those lines. And then I was the first one laid off when it all went downhill. And it was just like, I couldn't even believe it.
It's devastating.
It was devastating. And it's devastating because in some ways it feels like a betrayal. It launches you into a new unknown season of your life. Like, okay, well, what am I going to do now? And the effects that could have on you are difficult. And what I like is looking back in hindsight and seeing what God has done with it. Because I launched my YouTube channel through that, which has been one of my favorite things that I've done in life, because it's like, wow, I've built something now that is mine. And I wouldn't have done that any other way. And even though I've had a lot of tough mental battles since then, like I have since then seen that very boss who said that to me. And like I said, we get along just fine now. And it's very healing to be able to see him outside of that when both of us are done with that mental time and be like happy on the same page. It's so hard when you're going through that time and it just feels like everybody's out to get you. But you have to remember that that's not the case, and that God is good, and that even though we go through tough things that we don't understand, we don't yet see all the good that he's going to pull out of that. Another thing James 1 says, God doesn't tempt us to do evil. So, God doesn't cause the evil in our lives. He doesn't lead us into that evil, but it's a fallen world. So when we go through it, we need to have that confident expectation that this really stinks right now, but God is with me and he will turn it around.
It's the difference between having the black cloud over your life and having the light. Yes. Even on a cloudy day, when you got that light and you know that there's going to be good things to come. That you're
C.S. Lewis had a quote about that. Like he said, even like on those cloudy days where you can't see the sun, you still know it's there, because by the sun you see everything else. Yeah. And that's the perspective that James is talking about, that we know Jesus is with us. So even this hard thing, this stinks. But guess what? This won't end in my destruction. This will end in my maturity, because Jesus is going to strengthen and mature me through it.
Yeah. And I definitely want to do a week on forgiveness, and we'll talk about more about this situation that I was in, where in my case, I had to forgive her. But she is who she is, and she didn't like me, and not everybody in life is going to like you. Yep. And she should not have been my manager. and she didn't really treat anybody else any better. I was just unfortunately the only one she was supervisor of. And so sometimes there's toxicity in the world, and there's relationships that should not happen, and there are people that should not that should not be together, whether it's in a working environment or in a personal environment. But again, it doesn't really matter kind of what the trial is. It's that, do you have that hope of good things to come that can carry you through almost anything? And I am grateful now, in retrospect, that I had that experience, because I have way more empathy for anybody who is going through any kind of depression or mental illness or anything like that, any kind of dark time, because I know how it feels. And I remember people saying, like, wow, you've got like this, seemed like I was living with really good friends and they were great. I had benefits. I had a seemingly good job. I was going to school. There seemed to be on the surface a lot of things to be grateful for, and there were, but I was just in this horrible place. And so now I remember my dad asked me something, and I said, sometimes people feel this way and they have no reason at all. It's just, this is how they're feeling. And so, I don't know, I just have a whole new empathy, or I developed an empathy for people that are going through any kind of anxiety or any kind of experience like that I definitely didn't have before. I was definitely like a pull up the bootstraps kind of a person. But I know what it feels to, I know how it feels to be without hope, and it's horrible. And I look now, once I made that decision to quit that job, and just everything good that has happened to me is a result of taking that leap of faith and dive. I had no job to come into, nothing. And I was in the middle of graduate school. How could I quit my job? It seemed crazy, but I did, because I knew that if I stayed one more minute in that job, I would be a danger to myself. That's how bad it got. And so it was just such a hopeful moment for me. And it's something I always look back on. And I always just am so grateful that he didn't give up on me and kept
Yes.
uh, and kept helping me to find my hope again. I'm
Yep.
so grateful, and I don't know, it's just one of the formative experiences of my life.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing though, like if you think about that, that's how big God is. That
Yeah,
thing that was so dark and so heavy over you. Now you look back and you say, what a formative experience.
yeah,
It's amazing how God protects us even in those times, even when we feel like we don't have hope and we don't realize how much he's protecting us.
yeah.
And that's why it's so crucial to have that hope, because
Mhm.
I forget the verse where it actually is, but he says, you'll go through the fire, you'll get burned, you'll go through the water and you will not drown. I mean, over and over again, the Bible constantly acknowledges those dark clouds that can
Yeah,
come over us, how dark this world can be. But the Bible is full of people like King David who's been through it and said, but my hope is in the Lord. I mean, one of the stories I pulled out today, and I'll just quickly sum it up because I think it's just brilliant, is Paul and Silas.
hmm,
They their reward for a good deed, they cast a demon out of a girl. Turns out that girl was, a medium and was making her people a lot of money. And so they got mad and they threw Paul and Silas in jail. Paul and Silas were flogged. That's back in that time that hurt.
oh yeah,
And they were flogged bad. Then they were put in irons and put in the deep part of the jail is what it said. And so like they did this good deed and that was their reward for it. But what's interesting is when you look at what their hope is. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening to them. Now, right after that, there's a big violent earthquake, and it opened the doors of the prison. It broke off their chains, and they were free. But they didn't know that was going to happen. Even in the midst of that darkness, the flogging, and the imprisoning, they had that James 1:3 perspective, and they considered it joy, and they let that joy out. And like when I think about some of the tough times I went through, and the story you're telling, it's like it's hard in the moment. But that's how powerful God is in our lives. And look, God took this situation with Paul and Silas, and the jailer got saved. His household got saved. The entire scenario, which started so bad and so dark for Paul and Silas, changed because God flipped it. And so it's crucial that when we have those dark clouds over our head, because this is a dark, cloudy time with coronavirus, this is an anxious time. I think it's very crucial that we remember Paul and Silas. I think it's crucial that we remember James 1:3. I think it's crucial people hear your story, Rachel, and remember it. And they hear these things and remember and go, yeah, God brought them all through. He will bring me through.
yeah,
And one day I will look back and I will see how God took this and turned it around.
yeah. It's kind of like that poem. It's a cheesy poem, but I think it's true that the footsteps on the sand,
Yes.
and he looks back and says, why were there only one set of footprints in the sand during especially those hard times? Why his question sort of, why did you leave me alone? And it's in reality, it's that he was carrying him during those
Yeah.
times, and
Yeah.
it's really true. And of course it does take that hindsight, but that's the whole point of
Yep.
hope, is that it gets you
It
through
is.
so you can have that.
Yeah. Well, when you're going through it, to me, like, I mean, what I do personally, I mean, my sister was in a coma for 3 months because of a horrible car accident. My dad was crushed by a horse. And during those difficult times when they were near death, I saw by example my mom pick up the Bible and find God's promises concerning healing, concerning his love, concerning his power. And I watched her stand on it. And I am so profoundly grateful for that example, because it's what's brought me through my dark times now, is learning to find those promises. And I feel like I'm still relearning that. Let's just
Yeah,
be honest, because it's like when you're taking the test, it's like, oh wait, got to remind myself, what have I learned? Should have already known to do this. But to find what God has promised us in his word, to find those scriptures that are full of hope,
hmm,
that are full of his faithfulness, that are full of his deliverance, that are full of his promises. I forget which psalm it is. I think it's Psalm 34, where it says, those who look to him are radiant. they will not be put to shame.
And
Find those verses.
also to trust in
Yes.
him, that like that was part of my problem, was that I knew I had the prompting that I needed to leave like for years. And
Yeah.
I put it off and put it off and put it off and put it off. And until finally there was no other choice.
Yeah.
I had to do it. And I think that is something I've always tried to remember, is that when I get a prompting, when he's trying to guide me in my life, I need to trust. I need to trust in
Yes.
him that he knows.
Yes. It's hard. It
It's
really
hard. It
is.
really is.
But look at how that turned around. Like
Yeah.
you may have ignored that prompting for years, and look at how God still
Yeah.
brought good out of that. So it's like, I agree, man. I mean, how many promptings have I heard in my life that I was afraid to follow up on? And probably the greatest prompting, April 2007. I was living in Columbus, Ohio, and Columbus is gray and cold.
Yeah.
One spring morning, it was actually blue and sunny. And I went, thank you, God, for such a beautiful spring Ohio morning. And a prompting came up so strong. And it said, yeah, too bad. This is your last spring in Ohio, isn't it? And from that April through that August, things fell together so well for me to move to California. I couldn't even believe, even the job that I had said, why don't you go to California? And if nothing happens in 3 months, your job will be waiting for you. That's a sign from God, because that doesn't happen in reality.
Right.
When I moved, within 3 months, I met my wife.
That's amazing. I love
The
that.
promptings of God are awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's true. I quit the job. I ended up just being a student for basically 6 months. I had a little bit of money saved. And then I ended up becoming self-employed, and I've been self-employed. I worked from home for over a decade. So it's been an incredible thing. And, now I'm on Rotten Tomatoes, and I'm working to become a full-time film critic. Of course, that's hard now, but nevertheless, just one sort of blessing after another. And but yeah, it's an amazing thing when you trust in the Lord.
Yes, it is.
It really
Yeah.
is. So, well,
Yeah.
thank you so much. This was really great. I feel very edified. And let us know if you're listening, what you thought of what we had to say. I would love to hear your thoughts, and how you keep that hope alive, and how that helps you in your life. I'd love to hear what you have to say, and let us know if you have any topics that you'd like us to talk about. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and thanks again so much for coming on doing this. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I love it. It's edifying to me, because I got to practice what I preach, right? So
Yeah, it's true. So, where can people find you on your channel and everything?
You can find me on YouTube. My channel is called Durbania, like the genus of butterfly, which I did not know that existed until I named my channel Durbania, just after my last name, Durbin. But anyway,
That's
if you
funny.
search Durbania, you will find me, not butterflies. You will find my channel. So search that, or search that on the social medias, and you'll find me, and I look forward to hanging out with you. And I love to do this kind of stuff Rachel and I are doing right now on my channel. I love to dig deep into movies and find God in movies, and really, I just love hope. I love to spread hope and spread that light. And that's what my channel is about. Like, I like to find that hope even in movies and spread it.
Yeah, and you do a great job. So definitely, everybody check out Durbin's channel. I'll have all the information in the description. And you can find me at Rachel's Reviews, all over social media, iTunes, YouTube, and on Rotten Tomatoes. So check that out. And you can find me also at the Hallmarkies podcast. So take a look at all of that. We're posting almost every day. Last week we posted, which is crazy, but it's really fun, and a lot of good stuff that we're doing. So check it out, and thanks again, and have a great Sunday, you guys. We really appreciate all your support, especially this week when I was waiting for my test. I was really touched by everybody's just love and support that they showed to me. So thank you very much. And we'll talk to you all later. So talk to you next week. Bye, everyone.